Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brookes.
And tonight we have, once again, returning guest, Dustin Keith. Welcome back, Dustin.
Thank you. Hello.
We were kidding in the last one that you were going to be jealous because Anna was going to surpass the number of visits you've been on. And so we figured you'd be coming back.
Yeah, it's funny. She hasn't surpassed it, so she's been on twice. But we made so many podcasts out of that one. It seems like she just returned a ton of times. But yeah, there's definitely going to be a competition between you and Nate and Anna at this point.
There's nothing wrong with a little friendly competition. So
That's right.
Bring it on. I'll welcome it.
Competition makes us stronger.
Right.
Yeah. I hope you're feeling better from this morning.
Yeah, doing okay. Doing fair.
Cool. All right. So we brought you on because we wanted to continue the substance abuse topic that we've been going on for this entire month. February is the substance abuse month. And I felt like the other side of the coin to this conversation of substance abuse and recovery is prevention. And as many times as you've been on, I don't think that we've ever really mentioned or talked about your role as a prevention specialist. And you're a prevention specialist with a local community services board, specifically on prevention. So I wanted to first toss it over to you and give us the rundown on what you do with that.
Sure. Yes, I know most of the time I've been on here, I've had my political hat on, but I'm thankful for an opportunity to take that hat off and put on a prevention hat. And first, I do just want to say thank you to the podcast for hosting this discussion. This is something that, of course, is not new and it's not unique to Appalachia, but it has certainly become sort of an ingrained part of our culture and has a huge tie to the faith community specifically. So appreciate you all having this conversation. Appreciate you having Anna on, and I want to congratulate her on her year of sobriety. That is such an achievement, and she is such an example and a role model for so many people. So thank you all for doing that. But yeah, so I've worked in the field of prevention through the CSB for over 5 years now, but I have been involved on prevention coalitions since I was 13, starting back in high school with a suicide prevention coalition that we had formed here in Russell County, and now serve on about 5 different coalitions in the Cumberland Plateau area and with the Appalachian Substance Abuse Coalition, which serves all of Southwest Virginia. But yeah, so you're exactly right that prevention is part of that. Part of this, the piece of the puzzle. We kind of say that prevention is part of the continuum. There's a continuum of care for the treatment and recovery, prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance abuse. And prevention is that vital first part. But yeah, prevention is, it's not only about substance abuse, it's sort of a universal thing. It's a part of public health. It is a social science, it's a human science, and there are a lot of sort of moving pieces, and it's all based on data and science-based evidence, and it all comes down to trying to understand the public health issues and what is really driving those things in our communities. So especially, when we talk about substance abuse, we kind of get caught up sometimes in talking about opioids or talking about alcohol or talking about tobacco or vapes. But it's really important, especially in prevention, that you don't look at specific substances, but you look at addiction as a whole, and looking at the underlying causes of addiction, and how you can address those in a meaningful, global sort of way. So that's what we do in prevention. A lot of it is entirely, community based. It's collaborative, understanding that individually our impact can be very small, but put together with a whole bunch of other people representing a whole bunch of other sectors, different aspects of our community, including the business community, including schools and government and business and faith, the faith community, youth, recovery. All of those are important parts of prevention.
So I have a question, and this may be bringing up addiction, being part of this conversation, and this is a question. I guess it would be more specific to someone who is in recovery or dealt with addiction or whatever. But is there hesitation, or when should you use the word addiction? Like, is there a difference between substance abuse and addiction? I'm sure there is. I'm sure it's a complex issue, but I would think that some people may use it as to describe what they went through, and that some people may not. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, sort of colloquial terms that people use. And then there is a separate, an actual sort of health term, right? So there is a substance use disorder is a diagnosable and treatable mental health condition that is found in the DSM. That's like the official manual that's updated for mental health professionals, counselors, and therapists to use to make mental health diagnoses. So yeah, there is an official diagnosis for having an addictive disorder or a substance use disorder, and there are different addictions other than substance abuse that can be diagnosed.
So Anna couldn't be with us tonight, but I kind of asked her this question. Stacey, you had asked her earlier, why was she reticent to use the word addiction? And when I asked her that, she said she's not opposed to using the word addiction, but she wants to differentiate between active addiction and being an addict. And so she says for her, it was real important. She'll talk about when she was in active addiction, when she was actively using, right? And then addiction. So that for her is a big differentiating factor. Like so when she's talking with her friends or talking about friends, people may be in active addiction. That means they're using, like they are still currently using. They may be in a recovery program, but they haven't yet decided to lay or trying to lay a substance down. So there's a kind of a very distinct point where you move from active addiction into addiction in her circles and in the recovery community that she's been a part of. I hope I did that justice in explaining that. So, it's important to know that once you're an addict, you're never cured. It just doesn't go away. It is a lifelong a battle, if you will. But there is a difference between active and non-active.
I would think that there's probably a difference too between the type of substance that you are quote unquote addicted to. So, for example, if you're looking at opioids, I mean, it seems like the medical science shows that it is designed to rewire your brain to force you to want it. So it's not even just you are using something to get over a trauma. I think Anna talked a lot about trauma, and that was how she got led into substance abuse, is to deal with trauma. That with opioids, it even rewires your brain to where now you're designed to want it, I guess, for any reason. So, so I would imagine that this is a complex issue with talking about addiction, in that it's not one size fits all. That all addictions are going to look different.
Right. Yeah. So just like Brooke and Anna were saying that, that is in the recovery community, they do say that it is an incurable disease. It's something that can be treated and managed, but not cured. And yeah, Justin, you're right. From a medical perspective, we've had Dr. Stephen Lloyd talk throughout the Southwest Virginia region a few times now. He's sort of a leading voice on addiction treatment. He is a practicing addiction treatment physician, and he talks about how, physiologically in the brain, it can take the brain on average about 2 years to fully recover, to reroute the pathways and get them all sorted back out to the way they were before the chemical dependency started. So it can take some people less time, it can take some people more time, but on average, using PET scans and other types of technology, that kind of seems to be the amount of time it takes for the brain to rework itself is around 2 years. And still, relapse and slips are definitely possible from there on, through the rest of someone's lifetime.
So what about Suboxone? So from my understanding, Suboxone is used in sort of the recovery process to wean you off of harder opioids, but it's like that's still a narcotic, right? You're still taking something to kind of fight the urges or the cravings that you have that you need. You're still taking something, but it's just, I guess, a lesser version of it. And so any thoughts on Suboxone from your point of view, Dustin? And then I think you may have asked Anna this as well. Curious on your opinions on that.
Yeah, so Suboxone is a common form of medication-assisted treatment for addiction. There have been a lot of nonprofit, for-profit, and even public groups, organizations, businesses that have formed for the explicit purpose of treating addiction with medication-assisted treatment. We have, I think, at least 5 or 6 clinics in Lebanon alone that treat addiction using Suboxone. And what we like to say is that there are a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. This is not an exact science. What works for someone may not work for someone else. So for a lot of people, MAT or Suboxone can be a really important and helpful piece of their treatment. Because you kind of have, like on this continuum, you have prevention, treatment, and recovery. So that line from treatment to recovery is kind of blurry, right? Some people who can be on Suboxone or some other form of medicated-assisted treatment can be on it for 6 months or a year or 10 years, right? That can kind of help them make that transition from active addiction of some other substance like heroin or a prescription opiate into, titrating down over time to a smaller dose, and that can help them stay safe. So in some ways, it's a really important part of treatment and it can help a lot of people. In other ways, some people argue that you're just replacing one substance with another. But the most valuable resource across the whole continuum of prevention, treatment, and recovery is time. If we can buy someone more time to get help, to get treatment, or to get into recovery, then there's hope. And as long as there is hope, we can go on, right? So MAT, Suboxone can help us buy time if we can get someone off of heroin or off of using a really dangerous amount of drugs onto Suboxone, and then we can get them in counseling, we can get them in to more stable housing, or we can address other needs or get them in some treatment program or NA or AA. We can build those relationships, build connections for that person, and help get them time so that over time we can get them to a more safe place, a more stable style of living. That's always better, and it can help save lives. So it's part of the toolbox. It's a tool in the box.
Yeah, I think one of the things that folks need to understand is that not all substances react the same in a body. like, I think that when people use this category of drugs, right? Oh, that person's on drugs. And there's this idea in your head what that looks like. And the fact is different substances create different feelings and different rewiring of your brain. And then coming off of those substances also have a different reaction. I mean, Anna talked a little bit about that. Some detoxing is a little bit more dangerous than others. I mean, there are some that you can die, others you just feel like you're dying. And then there's others that, have just different, you have different sensations, and the experience is different. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I asked Anna specifically about her feelings on Suboxone or MAT, and much like what Dustin was saying, it's a tool in the toolbox. For some people, it's very helpful. For others, they abuse it. And her biggest issue with this was, if it's done in the correct way, if you are in a program that really is titrating your dose, if you're in a program that is helping you wean off of it, if you're in a program that is supporting you with these other types of treatment options, your NA, your AA, other things, then she thinks that it's a helpful thing. Her problem with that is when you have some of your rogue clinics who aren't doing some of that, and it's becoming more and more regulated, I think. So it's going to be harder and harder to do that. But that was her big issue, is if you're not getting the other support, if all you're doing is going in and getting Suboxone, and you're not working the steps, and you're not doing that, and you're never making strides to that, that's her problem with Suboxone.
That makes
But
sense.
she will say, she would follow this up with, I didn't struggle with opioids. I could hear her say that.
Yeah.
So, so it's a little,
it's hard to have, I guess, credible opinions on something when you didn't struggle with the thing that is in question to begin with, right? So I definitely understand that, but I do think that's completely valid in that, because I just from the outside looking in, I see that too. A lot of people, when they get put on Suboxone for their opioid abuse or addiction, that seems like the end goal. It's like, okay, you throw them on it, and they get their drugs through these clinics or whatever, and then there's no other steps beyond that. It's just that's what they're on for a lifetime, and I don't think that should be the case. Like, the goal should be that they don't have to be on anything, and hopefully that would be the case. If they were on a recovery program that used Suboxone correctly but didn't treat it as an end goal. So.
Yeah, I loved, Dustin, what you talked about time. Anything that you can do to extend time. Like, my hope would be that with, you, when you start Suboxone, it is a desire to get off of a substance completely, and not just a desire to do something legally, right? Like, but that time, having watched and been this close with folks in recovery, as I have this last year, what I realized is time is precious, and it is time that is the indicator of how someone is doing in recovery.
Yeah, and that's that concept of harm reduction, right? So there's primary prevention, which is what I kind of work mostly in, which is trying to prevent any and all forms of addiction before they start. And then there's also harm reduction, which is the prevention of death, trying to just stop people from dying. And, because of the severity of the opioid epidemic that we've seen in the past 2 years, especially, with a record number of people dying, we crossed that threshold of over 100,000 Americans died in 2021 from a drug overdose, the first time in history. So that prevention of death is really important too, because if we run out of time, if someone dies from an overdose, there's no time left to get them into treatment or using Suboxone or in a AA or NA program, because they're dead. So that's very important too, and that's why things like needle exchange programs have become so important. We have 2 needle exchange programs in Southwest Virginia that are doing amazing work, helping exchange dirty needles for clean one to help prevent diseases like hepatitis and HIV, and also connecting people to counseling resources and shelter and food and other social services. And that way that they feel more comfortable that when they are finally ready to get some help for their addiction, they know exactly where to go to get it. And all the while, we're helping the community to prevent other outbreaks of diseases and helping to strengthen the community. And things like Narcan. Narcan is the nasal mist, the opioid overdose reversal medication. It saved thousands of lives, especially here in Southwest Virginia. The state has been pushing us to do as many Narcan trainings as we can. In the last 18 months, we've trained over 1,500 people, distributed over 3,000 doses of Narcan in our 3 counties. So it's really important that, while we're doing primary prevention to keep addictions from forming in the first place, we also are working to prevent death from addiction as well.
So that's very important to bring up. Something that I've seen over the past, I don't know, several weeks, and I think it was in a bill or something that was passed for recovery and specifically harm prevention funding. So a bunch of these clinics can get this funding from the federal government to be able to implement needle exchanges. And I think the big, I guess, conservative meme that I've seen on Facebook is Biden crack pipes. Right. And that's what that's all about. Like it's basically they're making fun of, Joe Biden and the Biden administration for providing funding for these programs, which I don't know. Like, is it that people don't understand why this is a need, or is that because we still look so down upon, so negatively to people who use, that we really just, I'm saying we, generalizing here, American culture, we still aren't at the place where we really want to help them. We really still stigmatize them to where
I do think it's based in a morality discussion. One, I think it is. And, I think back to stuff like, if you have a felony, then you can't qualify for certain federal programming like food stamps, SNAP, or you can't get certain kinds of student financial aid. There are some of those things. And I think there's been this fallacy in people's brains that when someone's using, those kind of things will keep them from using because they don't want to jeopardize whatever. They're not thinking it doesn't matter. Like it totally does not matter. I haven't heard one person say, "Oh, well, I quit using because I was afraid I was going to lose my food stamps." Like I never have I heard that. But I do think that that's the same kind of attitude that says, well, if you don't make clean needles available, then addicts aren't going to use. That's baloney. I mean, that is just, it's BS. It's not going to happen. But I think there is a misunderstanding of how the diseases that are spread through drug use impact the greater community. So if we can prevent things like a hepatitis outbreak or an HIV outbreak, we're improving our community. But we're, if you want to talk financials, it's a lot cheaper to do a needle exchange program than it is to support somebody who is sick because of their use. I mean, it just using dirty needles. So for me, it's an equation of what costs less, right? I mean, that's one part of it. But 2, it's also what Dustin was talking about, where you build rapport and trust with people, because if you are in active addiction, you trust no one. You trust no one. You don't trust. The only people you trust are the people you're using with. And I mean, I've heard this over and over again, not only from Anna, but from some of the other folks that I've had the privilege of walking with during this last year and a half. And so when you become a safe place for them, then they start reaching out for other assistance and other help. And when the bottom falls out and when they've hit their whatever their rock bottom is, and it's different for every single person, sometimes that's the place they go to for help, and because you've built that rapport. So I think it's a misunderstanding, and I think it's this idea of substance abuse being a moral failure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think something important to note is that we don't seem to care as much about how much money we're pumping into the prison system to house people who have been convicted with drug crimes. We don't seem to care how much it's costing the state, ultimately taxpayers, on that, but we care when it comes to providing funding up front to keep them out of prison. We care about that for some reason.
I
So
don't think people could really understand what it costs to have someone incarcerated, but I also think that is a different box in people's brains, right? Like, you've broken the law, you go to jail. And I don't think people really understand what that means as far as the cost is concerned.
yeah,
Um
and I do wonder too how much of this is the mentality, because we see it as a moral failure, that we should not be doing things to make this a better experience for them. It's like, okay, if they use a dirty needle and they end up catching hepatitis, then they deserve it because it's a moral failure, you know. And I think that is by and large a still part of our culture that we have to get over. Like, we should not be seeing this as a moral failure. It's crazy. Any thoughts, Dustin?
I mean, I absolutely agree. You know, it is, I think, twofold. Yes, it's a stigma problem. Um, and I also kind of think it's also tied into just the animosity we've seen in the past few years towards science and towards, public health. Um, that people are sometimes less likely to accept that public health and data supports harm reduction. Public health and data supports prevention. So there's that component of it. It kind of sounds on the surface like that may not be the good thing to do, but when you look and drill down into the data, it is, like you said, absolutely cost effective, and it's just plain effective. So the state formed Project Revive, which is the layperson training with Narcan back in 2015. Actually, Governor McAuliffe signed that into law in 2015. And when it first started, Southwest Virginia was chosen as a pilot region for that program, just to train people in the community how to use Narcan and for them to access it. It was Southwest Virginia and Richmond who was struggling with a heroin problem. There were people, when we first did Revive trainings with Narcan in Southwest Virginia, there were people who were protesting the Narcan trainings. And at that time, they were very different. They were like 2-hour trainings. They were intensive. There was a skills demonstration. Whereas today, we can do it car side, 5 minutes, wherever you are. So it's changed a lot. But and there's so much animosity at that time. People were protesting it, saying that it was enabling people to overdose and to use because they knew that Narcan could save them. Which is just ridiculous, right? No one is going to intentionally overdose because they have Narcan. So in some ways, we have come far. We have reduced a lot of stigma. Not that it's completely gone, but things have improved a lot with stigma. I think we're going in the right direction. Same thing with harm reduction or needle exchange programs. Southwest Virginia, again, was chosen as a pilot region for these needle exchange programs because we were identified by the CDC at being at increased risk of an HIV outbreak, which would be terrible, because that would not just affect the people who are sharing needles for drug abuse, but also the families of those people, right? Because you can transmit HIV and hepatitis C through bodily fluids accidentally, inadvertently, like through sharing, like shaving razors or just accidental exposure to other bodily fluids. So that was a huge risk to our community as a whole. So the state launched these pilot programs for harm reduction, and only 2 counties, this was years ago, so only 2 counties so far have taken advantage of that funding. And that's really a shame. But the reason more counties haven't done it is there had to be approval and sign off from the local sheriff and the local board of supervisors. So you can see that because of the stigma and the difficulty we have approving things like that at the local level, why so few counties have done that. But they've been so successful, and really glad that we have them. But things are improving. I think things are steadily getting better, but it takes a lot of hard work from a bunch of different people to make that possible.
That makes sense. So something I was going to bring up, and I guess this has been on my mind. You know, my uncle passed away last month, and he had trouble. And you know, I hope no one gets offended for me bringing this up, specifically my mom, but I think he would want me to. He had problems, you know, in the later part of his over the past couple of years or whatever, actually getting pain medication. And it's because of his criminal record. You know, he had a drug-related criminal record, and doctors just would not do it because they said, I guess they seen the record and were like, no, not doing it. But he absolutely 100% needed pain medication for what he was dealing with all of his health issues. So, any thoughts on that? How do we get over that from, I guess, the state level or the federal level? Like, is it a we're trying to legislate too much now, or we're trying to incriminate too much? I think that might be the latter, but we're trying to incriminate too much to where now doctors are so afraid of writing it out that people who absolutely do need it just can't even get it now. Like, do you see that's what's going on? I guess that's more specific to Dustin.
Well, I mean, I guess that's certainly an opinion. There have been a lot of changes in the past 10 years with prescribing of medications, especially opiates. You know, before there was a huge component of healthcare which was focusing on managing pain. Right, there was that whole scale
1 to 10
pushed. That this was in dope sick, as you all mentioned before, of making sure that people's pain was adequately managed when they were receiving care. So where we are now is kind of different, right? So the CDC released in 2016 a prescribing guideline for opioids, and it kind of focused on use opioids only as a last resort. Use every other tool in your box, including, you know, ibuprofen and other analgesics and lower doses and other pain management methods for treating chronic pain, using opioids only as a last resort when everything else has been exhausted. And if you do have to prescribe an opioid, you start low and you go slow, I think is how they phrase that. And really, they were promoting things like massage therapy and other alternative treatments. But that's all for managing chronic pain. That seems to be where the issue was, developing addictions with opiates. You know, so managing acute pain, like something that someone would experience in a hospital if they were sick or post-surgery, something like that. You know, that's a different thing entirely. So I see, you hear a lot of anecdotes, just like from your uncle, people who have been uncomfortable with dealing with pain when they probably could have used an opioid or some other type of high dose painkiller. So I'm sympathetic to that. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the answer for that. But I do know that there are a lot of alternative techniques and treatments for pain that are really encouraging, that are being developed and studied. So I don't know. That's something I guess the medical community will have to kind of sort out over time, and hopefully it'll improve.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't be taking medical advice from people on podcasts are you not Joe Rogan? Like, who are you?
Right. That's exactly right. Talk to doctors, talk to the CDC. Don't listen to people on podcasts who don't especially know what they're talking about.
Great point. All right, let's go back to prevention, and let's talk about the age limits, because I know this is a conversation that our groups, Dustin and our groups, we've had before at our game nights, is about the age limit and 18 versus 21 and things like that. So can you tell us the data there? Like, is the data showing that 18 is the right age to be legislating, I guess? Or I mean, not 80, sorry, 21. It is 21, since we recently, Virginia just upped tobacco to 21 over the past few years. And it was, alcohol's always been 21, at least from my memory. So is the data showing that is the right age, and what, I guess, advocate for that?
Well, from the data that I've seen, it actually indicates that the age should be higher, somewhere between 23 and 25, because the biggest factor that we talk about when we talk about these ages to use these products legally, is centered around brain development. And that was, a central part when we were doing prevention-based programs in schools and talking with third and fourth graders. We spent a lot of time talking about why drugs, most substances, all substances, have been illegal for kids for a very long time. And that's because brain development in kids is so crucial, and drugs can play such a large negative role in that development. So they say that brains don't really finish developing until age 23 to 25. So that's kind of what the data suggests, as far as from what I can tell, is that it should be that age. But I guess the legality or the politics of things kind of dictate otherwise. So yeah, I was glad to see prevention as a field. It's something that we advocated for as a profession, both at the state and national levels, that the age be increased for tobacco products to 21. So we count it as a victory, but that's only one piece of the prevention puzzle. So there's like environmental strategies that we try to use to make the environment overall, make the environment less appealing, make those substances less appealing overall to youth. And then there's also education strategies, and awareness, marketing, social norms. All of those are components that help make up the overall puzzle that is prevention. Educating people and youth and parents on why the substances are harmful, what sort of ways that they're being marketed or towards youth by these companies who want to help create addiction so they get hooked on their products. So all of that plays into it. But yeah, we were glad to see it moved up to 21.
So some of the pushback that I've heard from the pushing the age up is that at 18, you are, in the eyes of the law, you're an adult for every other case. You are an adult to serve in the military. You can lay your life down for the government at that point, but you can't smoke a cigarette or you can't drink a beer in the eyes of the law. And so that's sort of the pushback. And I wonder if if those type of things should be coinciding. So if the age limit to serve in the military should actually coincide with when the brain development is at full peak,
Well,
or is it a different thing?
Here's one of the things that I have learned about addiction is that a lot of addiction, the using of substance starts because of trauma, and we are subjecting our young adults to situations that create trauma. I mean, if you want to think about trauma, you think about our military folks. And so this is something that I've really struggled with. I mean, I think about, and I know the science. And so although I can agree with the science, here's the other thing that we let people have children at younger ages, then we're saying you can smoke a cigarette, or if we raise it to 24 or 25, I mean, I had both of my children by the time I was 25. And, you know, there's this, I don't know, it's very difficult for me to reconcile all of that with, you know, you can't use this substance or you can't use that substance. Um, my question is, Dustin, are we seeing a decrease in the number of young adults using some of these substances because of the age changes? Because I had children in this age range when the change happened. So Anna was 18, already addicted to nicotine, when it then became illegal for her to buy cigarettes. And there didn't seem to be any grandfathering in of people who were already 18. So then they got caught in a catch 22, you know. So I didn't feel like that was fair. That part wasn't fair to those folks. But I have a hard time with this pushing the age, keep pushing the age. If we're legal adults and we're paying taxes and we're responsible for all of our own legal decisions, I have a hard time with that. On the flip side, as the parent of some of these young adults, we can't, as their parents, be legally responsible for them until they're 24. I mean, that's just a crazy long period of time, and they're ready to move on with life. And I don't want to be legally responsible for someone that I have zero control over. So it's hard for me. This is a really hard one for me because I see the science, but I've also lived it as a parent through those years.
Yeah. And thankfully, we don't have to make those sort of decisions. We are not elected to the legislature, so
Absolutely.
we get to kick that can to them. But yeah, so I think the data does indicate that it has been an effective tool. So of course, prevention is all a numbers game, right? No one in prevention, no one anywhere thinks that, oh, well, if we make this thing, whatever it is, illegal, that people will just stop using it, right? No one thinks that's true. No one, and everyone knows that if we increase the age of tobacco to 21, does that mean that people under 21 will just no longer use it? Well, of course not. That's not realistic. But if we do make this product, if we increase the age to 21, if we make the product harder to access, if we make it less accessible to youth, that is people under 21, then there will be a reduction in the number of youth who are using that substance, that drug, in this case, tobacco. So in most places across the country and in Virginia, we have seen reductions in tobacco use, smokeless tobacco, cigarettes, and in alcohol use, 30-day use for minors is declining. Rates are going in the right direction now, and that's a really positive thing. But we are seeing, other metrics that aren't as encouraging, especially along the lines of like youth mental health issues, youth anxiety, youth depression, thoughts of suicide. Those are increasing. But kind of everything in prevention we look at, because addiction can happen to anyone, right? No one is immune from addiction. Addiction can happen to people in rural communities and urban communities. If you're poor, if you're rich, no matter what your race is or your sexual orientation or your background, anyone can become addicted. But what we do know is that there are certain factors that can make people more susceptible to addiction. So that balance between what we call risk factors, which can make you more likely to develop an addiction, and protective factors, factors that make you less susceptible to an addiction, are really important. So we try to increase protective factors, and those are things like having supportive communities, having a strong family unit, having good friends and adult role models, developing positive mental health, having good support systems and developing resiliency, having supportive communities. versus risk factors, things like trauma, adverse childhood experiences, poverty, family histories of substance abuse, things that we have a lot of in Southwest Virginia. So if we can increase risk protective factors and decrease risk factors, we can reduce addiction for the whole community and increase prevention. So those sort of environmental things like increasing the age of tobacco, making the drugs less accessible, that's a protective factor. So if you in your community have a high rate of like awareness of the dangers of drugs, like we have really good programs in the schools and parents are aware how dangerous drugs are, and then we also have substances that are really hard to access. Like it's really hard for kids to get alcohol and tobacco and marijuana. Those are really strong protective factors that help us to increase prevention of addiction.
So Bolling, I had asked him, since he wasn't going to make it, if he had any questions specifically to you, and his was around this general idea. And his question, and he told me to reword it because it was worded badly, so I'm just going to read exactly what he said. He says, "Is there any worry about the government being involved, becoming a nanny state? Like, is there any worry that we have the government involved in these things? Is it the slippery slope that you hear about that, well, now the government's going to try to crack down on everything, every little thing, you know, it's sort of, I think, the prohibition of alcohol. So, you know, we have this dark image or this negative image of prohibition of alcohol. And I think everyone agrees that that was not the right move for America to have prohibited alcohol just outright. But is there any dangers that we're going to do the same thing with tobacco, with marijuana, with any other drug, really, opioids, really, anything, to where we just start legislating, we prohibit totality of whatever the substance is, and then we're going to see all kinds of negative stuff? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. So
Good answer.
That's the beauty of a democracy, I think, is, you know, there is no black and white line, right? There's no fixed line of where this should be, where the law should be, where the legislation should be. No one knows, right? We're playing this by ear. You know, this is the great American experiment. We as a society get to decide where we draw that line with our vote. So that's for us to say. You know, things swing back and forth. And, you know, especially in our field in prevention, we have to learn to just go with the flow, going with different administrations at the state and at the federal level. Some Congresses and administrations have been more favorable to prevention, and some have been less favorable. And we just, you know, do what we can at the local level to make a difference. But I guess we'll see. You know, right now we looks like we're kind of on a swing where we are providing a lot of wraparound services to people receiving treatment and in recovery. Trying to push a lot of harm reduction. I think that can have a positive effect. But, you know, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, we'll see that maybe the pendulum swung a bit too far that way. We're now having that discussion publicly with marijuana. We'll just have to see how it turns out and then address issues as they come up. But I think on the whole, we are moving in a positive direction because it feels like people are more open and they're more open to talking about these issues and having honest conversations about addiction and about trauma and about getting help when they need it. So something kind of a mantra that we use in the field and it's really important too in the faith community is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is not, you know, clean living. The opposite of addiction is connection. It's having connections with other people and connections in your community that are positive and fulfilling and supportive.
And that was I've heard this for years, the connection thing, and I've changed it a little bit from our experience about the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is positive connection. And we've added the word positive because when you're in active addiction, you have lots of connections. Now, they're not healthy connections and they're not positive connections, and they're connections that keep you connected to addiction, right? But you have lots of connections. And so, what I hear over and over and over again from people who are moving out of active addiction towards recovery, they're in treatment, right? They're moving towards recovery, is how isolating that is, because they are leaving everything that they know. And so, positive connections also before substance abuse starts is highly important. I think we talk about trauma. I mean, we've used that word a lot over the last couple of weeks on this podcast, and I think a misconception with folks about trauma is that, Dustin, you and I could experience the same thing. We could go through the same experience, and it could be much more traumatic for me than you. And so very often we sit and listen to somebody's story and say, that wasn't very that wasn't very traumatic. Like, I've been through more than that and I'm not using. We have to be really careful about that kind of thought process. And the way I say this is, I could run in here and stub my toe and ouch, it hurts, right? You could stub your toe exactly the same way, but you could break your toe, right? And mine's just bruised. And so, and we've all done that. We've watched people take falls that would kill us, and they're fine. But the idea of trauma is that we know that some things are much more traumatic than others, but we don't get to decide what's trauma for one person and what's not for another, or what it pushes that person, one step closer to using. But we've used that word a lot over the last couple of weeks, and I just wanted to throw that in about trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think one thing, as the church, and to once again tie it back to our faith communities, that we can do, and I think this hits home to what Father Boyd's message was this morning, and that was on the radical compassion that Christianity requires, that Jesus required of his disciples, of the people that he was preaching to. That radical compassion, you cannot be compassion by yourself. So if you're not in relationship and you're not connected with the people in recovery, if the church is not connected with these people, then we can't show that compassion. We can't provide any Christian compassion if we don't have those relationships. So I think it's important for the church to be involved in these type of things, and in the recovery process and the prevention process as well.
That's right. There are huge gaps, in prevention, treatment, and recovery that the faith community is uniquely qualified to fill. And seeing these churches and these faith communities offer NA meetings, to host NA meetings and AA meetings and have recovery meetings, and see them just wrap around and support people in recovery. It's really awesome. It's amazing to see. And a lot of churches are stepping up. And I've been really proud to see in our community so many churches do that. Maybe it's not one church hosting a meeting and they're doing everything. Or maybe one church, they provide their van and they help shuttle people to the meeting. And another church helps cook the meal. And another church does the music for the service. Understanding that it's not something that one church has to do, but if a lot of churches can help play one small role, that is meeting a huge need in the community, making recovery accessible, and those meetings open more people locally is really important. And same thing for prevention. Having community that's filled with good adult role models, and have youth groups and summer camps and Vacation Bible School. All of those play into prevention because it helps build strong, positive, supportive communities that, kids are less likely to abuse drugs or to start experimenting with drugs, any substance, if they feel like they're in a community that has made it clear that they don't want that. They don't want kids to use any sort of substance. That's data evidence. That's evidence based. So faith communities can play huge roles as part of this process. And I would, challenge all of your listeners, if your church is not doing something, if they're not providing any part of a recovery program or playing a role in prevention, have that conversation in your church. Talk to the leadership, talk to your minister, talk to whoever is in charge, and see why not. See what role that your church could play, because it's super impactful.
Yeah, I think it's impactful and helpful if offered in the correct way.
Yes.
It is harmful if not. So, like the ladies, especially the ladies that I've been working with lately, um, offering your space to have an AA meeting is helpful, or an NA meeting is helpful, but it can be harmful if it is done in a way that just screams judgment. And so for me, I think one of the biggest things that churches can do is get away from the shame game. Yes, we want our kids to know that we don't want them using substances, right? But in doing that, we have to not shame in a way that they feel bad about the family members that they have that maybe are using, or shame is, there's a difference between shame and guilt, right? And I think we saw the pushback with the purity culture in the church on the shame thing. And so when we offer assistance, when we offer programs for recovery, when we offer that, it's got to be offered in a way that doesn't shame the participant. Because if you use shame, and we do this in such subtle ways, and especially if you're in active addiction or early in recovery or even later, we have to be careful, because that shame pushes people away from positive community. And it is something that we have to be very attuned to, because those of us who aren't in addiction, those of us who are not suffering from substance abuse issues, don't always see our actions as being shameful, but they very much so are.
Yep.
Yep.
Offered in love. I think that's the key. Just like everything that the church does, if it's done in a thoughtful, prayerful, and loving way, then it's right.
Yeah, and I don't mean not be smart, right?
Mhm.
I mean, but things like you can, and I've worked with tons of churches, and I've heard the complaints and the arguments and we don't want people smoking on our grounds. We want you to have an NA or an AA meeting, but you're not allowed to smoke anywhere on our grounds. Like that in of itself is a huge stumbling block. Or, locking everything up except for the room that you're going to use for NA or NA. If you don't do that for every other group, then don't do it for A or NA. So there's some really subtle kind of things that really scream shame that we need to be careful of.
Yeah, completely agree. All right. So to close this, I have a couple of questions. These were fan questions that I wasn't able to really work in at any point. So I'm just going to end it with this. So one is to Brooke, one is to Dustin. Okay. So here we go. So Brooke first. One of the things that in the last podcast that you said was that I think tobacco is outlawed at your home, right? Except for so the vaping, you compromise with vaping, right? But tobacco's outlawed, and marijuana would be outlawed if you lived in Virginia and it was legal, right? So the question is alcohol also outlawed at your
Ooh,
home?
this is a good question. So, we are not big alcohol consumers anyway. Like, I have had a beer in the fridge downstairs for I don't know, 11 months maybe, because I'm just not. Aaron and I have never been big consumers. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have a cocktail or a beer with somebody if they ask us, or, we're not teetotalers or against it. But it is a conversation that we have had with Anna living in our home. And she kind of drives this with us being smart. So there is some alcohol in our home. But if we were to see that alcohol was diminishing, or if it was being used or abused in ways that we didn't feel comfortable with, then it would be poured out immediately. Because it's less about what we desire and what we want, and more about doing what we can to keep Anna safe. So for me, the tobacco thing was, I just hate it. I mean, I hate the smell of it. We have, we had a newborn in the house that had lung issues. The vaping was a compromise, understanding that Anna was making so many changes in her life that one more was going to be a lot. And that was in conversation with her and some of the folks in her treatment program, who came to us and said, you can't take all of this away at one time. And so kind of pick your battles. So the vaping was a compromise, and we even had to compromise on the type of vaping, and which, I mean, I now know more about Juuls and Vuse pods and mods and all this than I never thought I was going to do, because we wanted to make sure that we were helping support Anna in her recovery, but also having some pretty strong boundaries about what we wanted in our own home.
So the second part of that question is, do you view, and I think the answer is yes, but do you view alcohol and marijuana differently in terms of, I guess, abusing it, addictiveness, and all this stuff? Do you view it as one of the same, or it seems like you view it differently? But
so for us living in Tennessee, marijuana is illegal. So it's a no game. It's just not something that we would allow in our house, because that's who we are, right? Like, if it's illegal, we're not going to do it. And so because it's been illegal, I've never had to think about it. Now I have family members who live in other states, and where it is legal. And that would be something I would have to address, I think. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s under the Just Say No campaign, where marijuana was a gateway drug. And, if you smoke one joint, man, you were like going to be shooting up heroin in 3 days or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I think the science is changing a little bit. I'm still uncomfortable with it because it's a mood altering substance, which is one of the reasons why alcohol is used so sparingly in our house. I mean, we might have a mimosa for a special occasion, or, something like that, but it isn't alcohol. And I would put, I mean, I just don't know about marijuana, because I just haven't ever had to really think about it. But we don't use alcohol as a celebration. So it's not like, every celebration we have cocktails and beer available. And this is kind of funny. As a pastor, I've had to really change some of my attitude about alcohol, because alcohol is so prevalent in our society. We have been to many functions to where if we didn't have a beer or something, people felt like we were judging them, and it built walls up. But we have to know our audience. Like, I've got dear friends who are recovering alcoholics. Well, I would never have them into my house and have a beer. So we don't offer alcohol to people in our own home. But if we were with you all or anybody else and you were having a beer, then we might have a beer. But we have some tricks. Like, I like beer. So when we're out places, I may have a beer, but Aaron never does. He's a little more uncomfortable with that. Or we have one drink and we nurse it the entire night. So, I mean, I don't know. So that's kind of where we fall on that.
And honestly, alcohol, I think, is its own topic, and we should probably do a podcast on it. So, spoilers, that's probably coming in the future. Okay, moving on to Dustin, and this is specifically about marijuana. What are your thoughts on marijuana, more the legality of it? I mean, I think we already know the age limit discussion. We've already had that, but I feel like this may be the one thing that you and I are a little different on when we wear our progressive hats, our political hats. So the question specifically was, what are your thoughts on marijuana?
So yeah, here's the deal. Like Brooke said, marijuana is a psychoactive, mind-altering drug, and it does have there is a chance of addiction, not in the same way as other substances like opioids or cocaine, where you can develop a really strong chemical dependency. But there is sort of a behavioral addictive component of marijuana, so you can become addicted to that behavior and the way that it makes you feel. Um, so, and the biggest indicator from a data perspective that we have of someone using one substance, the biggest indicator of them using one substance is their previous history of use of another substance. The more substances that someone has used, the variety of substance, the higher the rate of their abuse of other substances is likely to be. That is an evidence point, that's data. So that's kind of that component of the gateway drug. So it's not, like Brooke said, if you have one instance of marijuana use or you have one edible, you're not immediately going to become addicted and start using a harder substance inevitably within some time frame. That's not true necessarily, but there is that component of sort of a slippery slope, so to speak, that, if you become comfortable using tobacco products and alcohol products and marijuana products, it's a shorter leap to experimenting with LSD or with cocaine or other substances, and that's evidence based. So, and what we've seen from other states, like the first handful of states, Washington and Colorado, and the states that legalized marijuana recreationally early, what we instantly started to see in those states is the perception of harm from kids, the percentage of kids who thought that marijuana was potentially harmful to them significantly decreased rapidly, because kids saw adults everywhere on street corners and at home and their teachers and whoever using marijuana. They instantly thought, oh well, it's not harmful, there is no risk to me as a child or as a youth using marijuana because it's so prevalent. And also that percentage of accessibility, the number of kids who found that marijuana was extremely accessible to them in their home or wherever, that shot up too. So kids at the same time found that marijuana did not seem as harmful and it was much more accessible to them just because it was legal for adults. So that's likely, what we're going to see in Virginia now that it's become legalized, and that's really harmful to kids, no matter what. So for those reasons, I would be and am opposed to full marijuana legalization. But there are components of that that are really important. The racial justice component of marijuana legalization and changing our criminal code to reflect marijuana in a more equitable way is really important. Not completely ruining someone's future just because they used marijuana at some point in their life. That needs to be addressed, and how it's disproportionately affected people of color should be addressed immediately. But yeah, that's where I'm at with marijuana. And also, there's another component too, that some people who have been addicted to opioids or heroin have found that using marijuana helped them in recovery, sort of as a less harmful way of coping with some of their life issues, and they found it helpful in the treatment process. So, the FDA has not approved marijuana for anything like that. That's something I think that's kind of being studied as a potential sort of aid to treatment for other addictions. That might have some viability, we'll see. but it's a complex issue for sure.
So
There's not really an easy way to answer yes or no. I support
I
that.
have a follow up
Sure.
for you. You use the word harmful to kids. So what is it about marijuana specifically that is harmful to anyone? Let's say adults, but kid, is it the mind altering aspect, the getting high, quote unquote, of marijuana that is harmful? And would you equate that to the same thing as being drunk? Like alcohol, you drink too much, now your mind's altered to where you can't drive a motor vehicle or you shouldn't be. Is that what you're equating as harmful here? Or is there something else about marijuana that is harmful?
I don't know that it's specifically unique to marijuana. It comes back to that brain development piece, that kids' brains are different fundamentally from adults because they're in such a heightened state of development. They are forming those synaptic connections and those neural connections in their brain. It's really important for education and development. And drugs that have a mind altering component can really interfere, delay, stunt development. And also, addictions can form differently in kids. So some addictions can be more readily formed in kids when they're in different stages of development. So that's really that's the harm specifically uniquely to kids is in development, their brains.
I think something too that we don't talk about very often with marijuana use is the social connections that occur. And we've talked about throughout these last couple weeks some of these social connections, and when there's marijuana use being the folks that are using marijuana, there are other things around that use, and so the likelihood of being introduced to something harder, if you will, kind of increases. I mean, I think about, when you're a teenager and you go to a party and there's some alcohol at that party, and the next party you go to, there's alcohol and there's a couple people smoking a joint out on the back porch or whatever. And then you start hanging out with those. I mean, it kind of changes. And so we don't think about the social implications sometimes of what these substances bring. And it changes the people you hang out with, and what they're doing.
So I guess to play devil's advocate here, is it because marijuana is illegal or has been for however many decades? Is it because of that the social connections you end up getting when you get into marijuana is going to be sort of the black market, people doing it illegally, so they're obviously going to be selling other stuff illegally, and if it was legal and regulated, then you're going to have more reputable means of getting it, and you won't have to venture into these. Is that a thought? Because that's what went through my mind right then when you were talking about that.
I think it's part of the great social experiment, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know that we know the answer to that because we've not lived it enough yet.
Yeah, you could argue that. You probably have some data that you could probably use to back that up, but so far, the early states that legalized marijuana, none of them have been able to figure out a way to make that distinction, to keep the drug separate for adults versus for kids. It always happens that if you make it legal for adults, if you make it more accessible, kids are going to get their hands on it. And that's going to be bad news for kids. Because if kids develop addictions early, that is a huge indicator for addictions and other problems later in life. Substance use disorder can in itself be traumatic, and that can lead to a whole slew of other issues that affect not only the
Yeah.
individual, but the
And you
family.
remember what Anna said, that you had the trauma that created the drug use, and then you had the trauma that was created by the drug use, and you have to combat both of those in order to stay sober.
So far, no state has figured out how to do that, how to make it legal for adults, but still make it, inaccessible to kids. So if there's a state or if there's a way that can be done, we can
But
try it.
that's also true for every other substance that we've legalized, right? I mean, so tobacco, alcohol, there is no way for us to completely prevent kids from getting it. And, you know, I think it is a very complex issue here. But, you know, I'm just not an advocate really to prohibit just outright. So thank you for that, those opinions, Dustin. I'm sure you probably know who asked that, but you can talk to him later.
Stacey, I have one more thing before we wrap up. Aaron
Sure.
asked me a couple weeks ago if there was anything that I wish I had said differently or I had talked about on our previous podcasts from our perspective as parents who have walked through this journey with their daughter and dealt with some of the ramifications of her substance abuse. And here's what I came back to. Early on, when Anna's substance abuse started, the people who were in our social circles, the people who, and not everybody, so don't hear me say that, but there were people in our social circles who knew about her drug use. There were people who knew that when we left town, there were parties happening at the parsonage. There were people who had this knowledge. And after it became public knowledge, when we found out about some drug use, when we started doing that, these folks came to us and told us, well, we knew about it, but we just didn't want to say anything. We wanted to protect her reputation. We wanted to protect hers. Now, we had a couple people come to us in very inappropriate ways, in really trying to shame us or embarrass Aaron or I. What happened was we didn't listen to those people because they were doing it out of spite and harm. Their kids had gotten caught or whatever, and our kid didn't, or what have you. And so we didn't really put a lot of stock into what those folks were saying because we didn't know them. But it was really hurtful to us that the people that we knew and loved, when they knew about this stuff, did not speak up. And part of that, we could have, as parents, and she was still living in our own home and she was underage, and we had some tools at our disposal that could have possibly prevented what we have been through now. But this idea of protecting somebody's reputation or not wanting to get involved or not wanting to be the person to tell somebody, that idea has to stop. If we are truly going to be faith communities, if we are going to be living life together, if we were going to create these safety nets for our children and our other adults, we have to be willing to speak the hard truth, even if that means life changes need to happen. I think if people had said to us 4 years ago the things that they had said to us in the last year and a half, 2 years, we could have prevented a lot of heartache and a lot of really just taxing situations in our legal system. And so although I understand why those folks maybe didn't say something, what I would encourage people to do is have the hard conversation. Have the hard conversation. Doesn't matter who they are. People would say, well, you all were pastors and we didn't want to ruin what? I mean, and so look what happened now, so just if you see, just say something. You can do it in love and there's ways to do that. But if we're going to be communities, we need to be communities.
That's a really good point. I think the church oftentimes is too focused on reputation, and we become enablers because of reputation. So I think that's a really good point.
I got a call to action. I'd be amiss if I didn't, plug some things. And first, you don't have to be connected to an organization. You don't have to have this as part of your job. But people should not let opportunities pass them by to be a support, to be a friend, right? So if you can help to be part of someone in recovery support system, or if you can help be a mentor or just a positive role model in the life of a kid, do it. Because those are the things, they may seem insignificant at the time, like taking your nephew fishing or, going to the high school and helping volunteer assistant coach the tennis team. I don't know, whatever it could be. But those are opportunities that make a difference in the lives of kids. And for recovery people, help out at your church. If your church does a recovery program, help cook the meal. Or if you can help give people rides to their treatment appointments, whatever it is, however small it is, everyone can help play a part in prevention and recovery. Our kind of motto at ASAC, and something that my director has said her whole life, is it's our community, it's our responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
No one person, no one organization, or the police department, or the government, or the schools, or whoever, no one person has the independent job of solving substance abuse or solving addiction. We all have a job, a role to play. We can all help make our communities better. So something else you can do is become a part of your local prevention coalition, right? In almost every county in Virginia, and I'm sure in Tennessee and all up and down Appalachia, there are county or city coalitions that would love to have you sit at their table. Every perspective is important, and every opinion deserves to be heard. So look online and find your local coalition and go if you can. In Southwest Virginia, we do have the Appalachian Substance Abuse Coalition. We're on Facebook. You can follow us there. Or also you can visit the website stopsubstanceabuse.com, stopsubstanceabuse.com. We've got tons of resources and links and information on our meetings if you want to attend those. But thank you all for hosting this conversation. It's so important that people all throughout the community are having these conversations and listening to people in recovery, listening to their stories, and that's how we can help reduce stigma and show people that we care about them.
Awesome. I will include all of the websites you just mentioned in the show notes, so everyone will have that resource. Thank you so much, Dustin, for joining us tonight. I think this will conclude for now our substance abuse series, but it was really good.
Unless folks have questions. I mean, I think we need to keep that open. If
Absolutely.
folks have questions, if we can clarify something, if you've heard something in some of our stories that you just that resonates with you, reach out. Like,
absolutely. Any questions to any podcast that we do, reach out. Let us know about them, because we will address them in the podcast. We may do a Q&A podcast, so we will address them, and it gives us things to talk about too. So it would be very much appreciated. It also very much appreciated if you could travel over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. So that would help us advertise as well.
Smash that subscribe button.
Mash that
That's right.
subscribe button, that little notification bell, so that you're notified when we release these things. But thanks, Dustin, for joining us. I think it's an important message to get out, and I hope that we are, being a positive influence or getting the information out to people on recovery and prevention and all that. So peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.